I am here with several speakers, but currently your 4 o'clock speaker is Dr. Peter Hershock, and what he's going to talk about artificial intelligence, and he is from the Asian Study. I'm going to read it off here because I will get a word wrong. It's pretty long. The Asian Studies Development Program at the East-West Center in Honolulu, Hawaii. And there he designs and directs programs to assist undergraduate faculty and universities in incorporating Asian studies into their curriculum. And so that's a lot of what they do. Is that all you do, or a lot of, no, the Institute? It is a lot of what the Institute is comprised of, is just helping us being faculty, learn how to incorporate Asian studies into our everyday courses that we do. More recently, he has helped, and I'm also going to read this so that I don't mess it up, and he has been instrumental in launching the East-West Center's initiative on humane artificial intelligence, and he's focused on the societal impacts of emerging technologies and has already published several things within that realm. And today, he is going to talk to us about AI, attention and autonomy, and some Buddhist reflections. So if you would join me in welcoming Dr. Hershock.
Well, thanks for having me here. It's appropriate, being from Hawaii, that I get some ocean in the background. And I'm not a PowerPoint guy, so you just have to listen to me. What I want to talk about is the future, and in particular, the future of artificial intelligence and of human freedom. Because this is part of a workshop on Southeast Asia, I'm going to put it a little bit in the context of what's going on in Southeast Asia first. Give you a few basic facts about why Southeast Asia region we might want to think about when we think about artificial intelligence. But because I'm trained in Buddhist philosophy, I'm going to be coming at this from a bit of a Buddhist angle, give you a short introduction to Buddhism, what the basic teachings are, and why some of those teachings are really useful in us thinking through what are the real risks of intelligent technology and the way that it's affecting us personally and the way it's affecting us as societies. And the basic point that I'm going to make is that one of the huge risks that we face is that our engagement with intelligent technology is placing us at risk of forfeiting our 2 most basic rights as sentient beings, that is, as beings who think and feel and act in the world. And that's our right to cultivate freedom of attention, without which we have no freedom of intention, and without which all other freedoms become superfluous or simply imaginary. So that's the kind of prospect we're going to go through. Talking about Southeast Asia, it's a region of 672 million people, so about twice the population of the United States. And according to the Southeast Asia Public Policy Institute, they're estimating that between 2018 and 2024, the economy, the digital economy in Southeast Asia grew by over 250%. So that's almost a tripling of the digital economy in the region. They estimate that between now and 2028, the digital economy related to artificial intelligence is going to increase the gross domestic product of the entire region by something between 13 and 18%. That's a pretty big number. And if you ask people running the businesses in Southeast Asia whether they think generative AI is going to pay off for them, whether there's going to be return on investment, 1 out of 6 of them say, yes, for sure, absolutely. When? In the next 6 months. In the next 6 months, they are convinced they're going to be making a return on investment. The estimate that is that across the region by the year 2028, 1 out of every 6 decisions that are made by people in the region, decisions about transportation options, about dating options, who to socialize with, 1 out of every 6 of those decisions will be done by agentic AI. That is artificial intelligence that doesn't just read your device and feed back to you sort of search results that you like or recommendations that you would feed on your social media. This is artificial intelligence that has the capacity for actually doing things in the world. So I want to take a train from here to, well, maybe not here, I don't know if you get trains here from Killeen, but I was just up in, say, the Boston area. If you're going to go from Boston, you want to take a trip down to Washington, D.C., you ask agentic AI to book the ticket for you, and it shows up on your phone. Agentic AI carries out actions in the real world. And in Southeast Asia, they expect 1 out of every 6 decisions to be done by agentic AI by 2028. That's a pretty amazing thing. And you think that, well, this is just an estimate, who knows whether it's going to come true. But if you look at the way in which Southeast Asians are making use of social media, digital technology in general, and especially artificial intelligence, there's pretty good reason to believe that these estimates are on track. If you look at, for example, gaming, how many people here do mobile games? Of course, so many people do. And of all the games that are downloaded in the world, 12% of them are downloaded in Southeast Asia. 12%. What's the population of Southeast Asia? 672 million people. That's about 8% of the world's population. They're punching way above their weight and downloading 12% of the total world. If you look at things like engagement with generative AI, do you know what generative AI is? If I use that term? It's the large language models, ChatGPT, Midjourney, if you're doing video, images, and stuff like that. In Southeast Asia, of the major platforms for these conversational artificial intelligence, so think ChatGPT, but kick it up a few notches because these are acting as companions that you engage, asking for advice about things. So it's not just write my term paper for me. It's people using this saying, I've got a difficulty in my family thing. My mom's always doing this. I don't understand why she's always yelling at me. What can I do? And you ask the AI system, AI gives you a personalized response. If you look at the number of people who are using these, character AI is the #1 in the region. 95 million people daily are using character AI. There's another one, Poly AI, 72 million people. There's another one, Chai AI, another 72 million people. The smallest one that I saw the statistics on is Talkie AI. That's 60%. I mean, 60 million people. 60 million people every day making use of these kinds of systems to ask questions about what to do with their life. So if you're looking at an uptake of the type of technology that's now available, Southeast Asia has a really rapid uptake on all this stuff. If you just compare those numbers for using these conversational AI systems with engagement with typical social media, TikTok, every day, only 75 million people. Instagram, 65 million. So we're talking about people in the region having greater uptake for engaging with generative AI, where the AI is there as a partner for them in their world to try to figure out what they're doing. This is pretty amazing, I think. In the Buddhist world, turning to Buddhism now, among Southeast Asian Buddhists, there's a great engagement with making use of artificial intelligence, but also a lot of confidence that we can learn something from artificial intelligence. There's a Thai Buddhist ethicist who's one of the first people that started doing ethics of technology that was intercultural in nature, started doing this roughly 30 years ago. Suraj Hongladharam is convinced that artificial intelligence, especially these new generative systems, can actually be better Buddhists than most of us. Why? Because one of the basic Buddhist teachings is most of the conflict and trouble and suffering that we engage in the world, that we experience, is a result of our own misplaced desires, our attachments, our inability to let go of things. But AI has no attachments. AI has no desires. AI does not experience the negative emotions of anger and hatred and greed. So AI is in some ways already better than we humans because it's not afflicted by these things that cause us so much pain and suffering. If you go to Malaysia, there's a site that you can go to. The name of this is Norbu AI. Malaysian AI innovator developed this system to be able to answer questions about Buddhism, basic teachings and doctrines based on traditional text. So you can key your stuff in contemporary language and you'll get a response on what's the Buddhist reading about what you ought to do about premarital sex, and you'll get whatever the Buddhist canon has on that. But the Buddhist canon doesn't have too much on that. So in Thailand, they developed an alternative system, Pramahi AI. And the point of this one is take the kinds of questions that young people, they define between 18 and 29 years old, will be asking about Buddhism, and then develop a Buddhist system that is rooted in Buddhist textual treatings, but it responds in ways that 18 to 29-year-olds will understand, using contemporary analogies, metaphors, and so on, rather than going to these 2,500-year-old texts. So within the region, Buddhists are on the uptake. And this is not unusual, because Buddhists, like most people who deal in the world of religion, if you're spreading a religion, you need communication technology. Maybe it's just talking, but then there's print. When was the first religious text in the world printed? With movable type. Gutenberg? Ever heard that name? Usually people say the Gutenberg Bible, the first big religious text published. No, the first book published using movable type was in China in the year 868, and it was a Buddhist text called the Diamond Sutra. So Buddhists have been at the cutting edge of appropriating new technologies as they've come up. The next big communication boom was at the end of the 19th, early 20th century with broadcast media, radio, and then television. Buddhists across the region very quickly adopted this. Mass printing, using cartoons. Buddhists have always been making use of the latest stuff in order to be able to promote Buddhist practice. They've also had to be critical about technology, though, because even though the first book was printed in China to promote Buddhism, Confucians started making use of printed text to vilify Buddhists and to print stories about what Buddhist monks and nuns were really doing in the monasteries and how bad they were, because they're taking money away from the Confucian sort of central organizing part of the state, and those resources were being put in Buddhist institutions. So Buddhists had to deal, and this started back about the 10th century. So Buddhists have been dealing for over 1,000 years with dealing with misinformation and disinformation campaigns in the printed media. So Buddhists are not just mildly adopting technologies, they're also critical of what technologies can do in terms of harming us, in terms of spreading rumors, falsehoods, etc. And in the 20th century, there were many Buddhists across Southeast Asia who became very, very critical of what was going on, for example, with mass industrialization through the region, what that was doing in terms of destruction of the environment, or the way in which mass media, whether it's digital or old broadcast media, could have really negative effects on people's own personal lives and the way that they're leading, the kinds of decisions they're making. So Buddhists have always been a bit critical as well of technologies, just not naive adopters. And I'm going to pick up on that thread and try to introduce some basic Buddhist thoughts that will help us to understand what's really going on with AI now and why we need to be wary about it. So Buddhism is often presented many, many different ways. It's a tradition that's 2,500 years old, so there's lots of possibilities for what you say Buddhism is. But I'll start by saying Buddhism is not an otherworldly religion. Buddhism's basic teaching is we've got conflict, trouble, and suffering as human beings. Nobody likes it. Let's try to get rid of it. Let's try to understand what are the causes and conditions that lead us to be in conflict, to have trouble with one another interpersonally, and to be suffering as a part of being in this world, and let's do something about that. So the basic teaching is we want to free ourselves from being in any kind of compelled or compulsive mode of being present. We want to be present in ways that we're not compelled to be there, we could be otherwise, and that we're not being there compulsively. So when people have compulsive desires, that's a bad thing from a Buddhist perspective. Because when you're compulsively desiring, it's like a fire that eats you up, right? A log gets burned in a fireplace, and the term for that type of suffering, tanha, literally means clinging. It's like the flames clinging to a log. That kind of desire is bad. Desire that you want your children to do better than you do, that you want your nation to prosper, those are good kinds of desires, not a problem. But so many of our desires are those clinging forms of desires and attachment. The Buddhists say that's not being freely present. If you're caught up with those kinds of desires, you've got to get the latest iPhone. You know, mine is, it's in my bag, it's an iPhone 7. And yeah, and you know, my son's always critiquing me, don't you want a new one, Dad? I say, what for? This one's perfectly fine, but yeah, but everybody's got the new ones, you know. It's just like for him, it's a competition thing. And Buddhists would say this is not so good necessarily. for you as an individual to feel like you're not complete or good enough unless you get the latest one. So Buddhists just say, look, we all want to live without conflict, trouble, and suffering. Let's figure out how to do that. And they say there's two basic insights that'll help us to do that. The first is realizing everything arises interdependently. Nothing exists on its own. You might think that you ate breakfast and you were really happy, you had your sausage, you had your bacon, eggs, your toast and stuff. Well, for you, it's just a full belly and a pleasant feeling and a great taste. But what about the pig that gave up its life to produce the sausage or the bacon and so on? And Buddhists are basically saying, look, you have to take it into account. It doesn't mean you stop eating meat. Lots of Buddhists eat meat. But it's when you're eating meat, you're aware of the fact that you're taking another life, and what do you want to do about that? How do you want to think that through in order to do it in a way that's conscious, respectful, appreciative of what you're taking out of the world, because nothing exists independently. Everything arises relationally. So one way of, in the East Asian Buddhist Mahayana traditions of talking about this teaching of interdependence, is each thing is only what it means for others. What does it mean to be a son or a daughter? It means who you are toward your mom and dad, and your grandparents, and your aunties and uncles, and your siblings, and your friends. If you take away all those relationships and what you mean for everybody else, what's left? A Buddhist would say nothing. You have no self, ultimately. Your self is your relationships with everything else. And it's the quality of that interdependence and relationship that we're trying to change, the quality of it. And what's crucial to that, second Buddhist insight, everything arises karmically. The things that we're experiencing are not a function of chance. They're not a function of predetermination and destiny. They're not just a function of natural laws, as we would talk about them today. The things that happen to us are happening because we've had certain values, intentions that we put into action, and the patterns of those actions determine the patterns of things that we experience. But the kicker is, everything that you experience, every outcome of your past patterns of actions based on values and intentions that you've held is also an opportunity. Every experiential outcome is also an opportunity to change the way you value things, to change your intentions, to change the way you're putting them into action in order to be able to reduce the sum total of conflict, trouble, and suffering that you and those that you relate with that make you who you are, that you can reduce that sum total. So pretty basic insights. And the one that really is important is this idea that you can change the way things are changing by changing the ways that you're thinking about what matters most and how you put that into action. Now, I'm going to suggest that really those two basic insights are important for us understanding what's at stake with artificial intelligence, and especially the way in which what has developed that we nowadays call the digital attention economy. What is attention? You're a young man. Do your parents ever tell you, you're not paying attention? You've heard it, right? Yeah, I heard it all the time too. Well, guess what? Attention is not just something we pay. It's not something quantifiable. That's the way in which the digital realm is dealing with our attention. It's how much time are you on site? How long do you spend on that site? And that's what people talk about as the digital economy. But Buddhists say, attention is not just how much time you're spending on something. It's the quality of relationship that you're establishing with things. It's what you're taking out of that, because your attention tells you what you considered important and significant. And if you're measuring people's attention and tracking their attention digitally, what you're tracking is what people think is important, what they think matters to them, and how that changes over time, and how they put it into action. So what's going on with the digital attention economy is not just tracking time spent on the web. What it's doing is it's tracking patterns of perceived significance, of what we think is valuable in the world, tracking that, and then feeding that back to us based on whatever the capitalist or corporatist or national agendas of the people who are running those platforms is. So what is going on with the digital attention economy is every one of us, when we engage in, whether it's social media or agentic AI or what have you, what we're doing is we're performing as consumers, yes, of digital products, media products, YouTube videos, Instagram videos, the feeds that you get, these things are all produced for us, and they're being recommended to us because of our specific interests. The ways in which we have attended to the digital media, that's all being fed back to us. But we're also acting as producers. Producers of the training data for algorithmic systems that operate innovatively and tirelessly to try to figure out how better to capture and direct our attention. So if you think about it, we are living in this system where the global economy, go back to Southeast Asia, where they're saying, oh yeah, the GDP of the region is going to be growing between 13 and 18% because of AI and digital tech take-up over just the next 2 or 3 years. What does that really translate into? It translates into better capture of people's attention and an ability to direct those people's attention. When you're talking about agentic AI and engaging with an AI system that's going to give you advice about how you ought to travel, how you ought to get places, how you ought to deal with your family problems, serving as a kind of a surrogate friend for you, whether it's done with Buddhist intention or not, or whether it's got Buddhist text in the background or not, it's still taking something that we normally would be responsible for. That is determining for ourselves what matters most here. And the system is instead feeding us things that I think we will like and consider as mattering to us. What we're afraid of is not just our time being lost. That's bad enough. What these systems are able to do is to predict our beliefs, predict our likes and dislikes, predict what we'll be afraid of, based on all the evidence that we give into these systems as we engage them. But the capacity, the power to predict what we like and dislike is also the power to produce or induce likes and dislikes. Now, we've known for over a century through open cranium surgery that you can take an electrode and stimulate part of the brain and get somebody to smell a rose. You can get them to raise their hand. And when you ask that person, why did you raise their hand? They will say, I had an itch. Or if it's a classroom, I'm raising my hand to ask a question. And people have assumed that that means consciousness doesn't matter causally, because you can stimulate the brain, get the hand to go up, and they invent a reason for why the hand went up. Buddhists have a different understanding of consciousness. They see consciousness as the context within which the sensed presence, us as sentient beings in the sensed world, consciousness is the relationship between the two. It doesn't exist in us as an organism. It's something that exists in the relational dynamics between sensing presences or beings and sensed environments. This is something there's some contemporary and activist 4E theorizing about consciousness, if people do the science of it, that's quite similar to this. But the Buddhist implication is consciousness is causally relevant and it's not reducible to what the brain's doing. But Buddhists would say if you hack the system, because the brain is a recording of everything that's mattered to us over time, over evolutionary time periods, it sort of has our biases built into us, right? Our bodies have biases built in to have salt because we need them for our living, sugar because it's quick and easy. And all of us know if you have a sugar addiction or a salt addiction, it's pretty hard to kick. Sugar's no problem for me. Salt, bad problem. So it's hard to kick that. Why? Because it's hardwired into the infrastructure of our consciousness. Why do I mention this? Because our infrastructure of consciousness from a Buddhist perspective isn't just the brain and body environment relation, it's the whole thing. It's brain, body, environment as the infrastructure of our conscious presence. That means if you manipulate the brain, you're hacking the infrastructure of human consciousness. Buddhists would say if you're hacking our digitally extended selves, the digital infrastructure that for most people today is as much a part of their life and their world as this physical thing is, because most of their engagements are digital now, most of their friends are met online, most of their entertainment is done through online, almost everything that people do other than eating and sleeping is done through this digital mediation. So Buddhists would say that's part of our infrastructure now. And when you're using algorithms to manipulate human thoughts, behaviors, opinions, and so on, it's just like hacking the neural infrastructure. When you raise your hand, Did you do it because someone stimulated you at the brain with an electrode? In that experimental setup, yes. But are the decisions we are making now, when we vote, when we decide what to eat, when we decide what films to watch, what music to listen to, what matters most to us in making our decisions about the world? Is it really us making those decisions, or is this the hand-raising with digital hacking of our consciousness? I would posit that's a really worrisome fact. The possibility even that that's the best way to describe it. And you might say, well, that's a bit alarmist, you know. And there are no current scientific studies that, for example, have a direct causal link between social media use, let's say by youth or teenagers, and rising anxiety, depression, and youth suicide. Why do we not have any causal evidence? Because we have a very limited understanding of causality. Our understanding of causality is if you can't draw a direct line between media use through the senses, through the brain-body system, emotional system, out into behavior in the world, you've only got correlation, not causation. And you can't regulate correlation. You could only regulate it if it's causation. Think about how many decades it took for people to say smoking tobacco is bad for your health. It took generations of scientists saying it again and again because no direct causation, only correlation. Buddhists would say we need to worry anyway. But I'd say if we just look at geopolitics, we know that a lot more is at stake here than just whether you've got some fancy theory about consciousness and you see what's going on with digital media as being consciousness hacking. Because China and the US are in global competition over AI. It's a global competition. China and the US both want to be number one in the world with artificial intelligence. And why do they want to be number one? Because they're convinced of three things. One is that digital media is a new form of power. The digital stuff, artificial intelligence, all the digital world, all that technology is a new form of power. That the systems themselves, the digital systems, are breaking down old patterns of power distribution, and they're opening up possibilities for reconfiguring the basic foundations of power in the world. And number three, that the country that gets ahead to trigger the power law dynamics of network growth are going to be number one, unassailable, top of the world, able to orchestrate the global order. China's convinced of it, the US is convinced of it. So we're in a position where artificial intelligence today is a bit like nuclear and space competition was during the Cold War, where the United States and the Soviet Union were locked into this battle. Who's going to get into orbit first? You might think, oh, they just wanted to get orbit to prove that they can do it. No. They were getting in the orbit in order to be able to have communications around the planet, bounced off satellites that give you instantaneous information about movements of troops or people around the world. What's at stake with the digital attention economy is moment by moment instantaneous mapping of feelings, emotions, desires, actions across the world in real time, all the time. And the system that has all the platforms that are being used, the dominant systems that are in place, that country or that corporation will be able to control the world. That's what they feel is at stake. And yes, you could say, well, wouldn't we still rather want the US to win rather than China? And I'd say, you know, Cold War, one side wins, one side loses. Checkmate, stalemate. Now, checkmate is US wins or China wins. What happens if the US wins? Personally, I'll vent my little politics here. I think we would end up in a world where we have more post-truth fractiousness, where we have increased populism, where we have increased militarism, and in which we have this sort of reality deferral on the basis of everybody has a right to free thinking and a libertarian celebration of market individualism. That's where we would end up. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Debatable. But for much of the world, that leaves them out. But what if China were to win? Well, then you're going to have this state-orchestrated, engineered harmony where the Communist Party decides it's going to determine not what right to think the way you want, but what right thinking consists in. And we now live in a world where the US and China are coming close together on that. in which the whole point is for the state to engage in this reality definition where they get to decide for the population what the world that they're going to live in. I don't think either one of those is good for the global majority. But also neither is a balkanization where every country, every nation decides it's going to have its own sovereign sphere within which digital dynamics play out. Why is balkanization a bad idea for AI? It's really simple. You've got three different kinds of traps. You've got coherence traps, decoherence traps, and benefits caps. The coherence trap, I don't know, how many people do AI and know about algorithms and objective functions? Okay, so you set the objective function on the AI, and your AI self-improves, keeps learning how to do that better to reach that objective function. Well, that's really great if you have a very specific idea about what you want to achieve. But if we live in a world where everybody doesn't agree on what the objective function of, say, a good society would be, it's very hard to get a machine system to do it. What you can do is to get pre-programmed ideas about what's best, what matters most, get the algorithmic system to orchestrate society that way. We could do that. But that's like getting us in this position where instead of having the possibility of improvement over time, you predefine what success counts as. The system gets better and better at realizing success in those terms. So basically what you do is you turn the learning curve into a spiral that gives you guaranteed success. That's a problem for human freedom. So the coherence trap is, yeah, we could design this system, but it's based on our current design ideals. Think if you go back 150 years and would this room look this way at a university in Texas? You certainly wouldn't have all the women in this room. You wouldn't have people of color in this room. You wouldn't have a lot of the things that make a university a community in which we can vibrantly engage one another with our differences and make those differences operate as resources for us to learn from one another. We could do that now. Before, there'd just been a bunch of white men sitting in this room, and they would have all been between the ages of maybe 18 and 25. You know, with just the old people who, like me, the 70-year-olds, are up there telling everybody else what to think. It's a different world now. But if we had these agentic systems, these AI systems 100 years ago, we would have hardwired that structure into the system. And we would not have broken out of it and wouldn't have this room. Buddhists would say, we've got just as many prejudices operating now. We've got just as many false ideas about what matters most and what we ought to be promoting in terms of our value constellations and our intentions. Why do we know that? Because we've still got plenty of conflict, trouble, and suffering. If we didn't, we'd all be good to go. But since we've got all this conflict, trouble, and suffering, do we really want to take our current patterns of values and create objective functions for our learning systems that are going to get better and better at delivering just that? I don't think so. We want to leave room open for improvement, not just guaranteed success. The decoherence trap is, yeah, let's just all build our own individual systems. So Malaysia can have their system, and it's a bit more Muslim-leaning. And Thailand can have its system, and it's a bit more Buddhist-leaning. And you can go to the Philippines, and it'll be very Catholic-leaning. And in the region, you can have all these different systems with different values built in all the individual ones. Well, the problem with that is that then the kind of value of the differences between these different societies is not being made use of. This is the kind of the decoherence trap. Because then within each national stack, the digital systems will get better and better at delivering that nation what its dominant values are. And in Thailand, I'm sorry to say, that's Theravada Buddhism, and that 10% of the population that's Muslim and the 5% that's Christian, they're going to be shortchanged by that. That's not a good thing. But if Thailand's digital system is hooked up with Indonesia's system, hooked up with the Burmese system, hooked up with the Filipino system, if those systems are all communicating together, then each of those individual systems can be like species within a digital ecosystem, in which each one of those governance sets of principles and values then serves as a basis of mutual contribution for all the other systems. It's there to learn from. So you could have that kind of a system, but if you just have this data governance balkanization, you don't get there. You lose all of that, and you lose the ability to get away from values lock-in. It's like the checkmate version of US wins, China wins, you just shrink it down at the national level. Not a good idea. But then you have the benefits caps. If you're doing stuff on health and using AI for health, What you want is a global database. You do not want just the database from a place like Korea. Why? Because Korea is 99% Koreans, of Korean ethnicity. And if that's the only data you're using, it'll be good for identifying stuff that works for Koreans, and it just won't be applicable a lot of other places. People, different communities, have different body types. We have different liabilities to disease. We have different strengths and capabilities. And if you're building a world-class health system that's using AI, you want the maximum amount of data from around the world. You don't want to minimize it by carving up the world. That just gives you a benefits cap. It caps the amount of good that the AI system can do. So we need a global governance ecosystem in which different governance strategies can operate like species within an ecosystem, where the differences between those different governance systems are resources for potential mutual benefit to global sharing and flourishing. Wonderful. But that's not the real world, is it? So we live in this world where we've got China and the US competing, and we've got most people around the world rapidly adopting AI without any real cognizance of how it might be affecting their capacities to own their own attention, without which, if you don't own your own attention, if you're not able to determine what you're attending to, you can't really be in charge of what matters most to you, because your patterns of intention will be based on only what you're experiencing. And if what you're experiencing is a function of your attention, and your attention doesn't belong to you, then your intentions no longer belong to you, and all the freedoms that you think you're exercising, your freedoms of choice, may not be manipulated things like raise your hand because the brain got stimulated a certain way. So we don't want to go there. What do we do instead? I think one of the things we could do is to talk about developing a global human data rights regime. Yeah, rights don't sell good everywhere. Human rights don't sell good everywhere. But I think data rights could sell really well everywhere, because we should have some really basic ones. So number one is the right to retain the data that we generate. Data is not digital exhaust. People sometimes think, oh, the data from my searching online and my patterns of what I buy and what I purchase on Amazon and what I listen to and so on, it's just like the exhaust out of a gasoline burning car. It doesn't affect me and where I go and what. That's not the world as we live in. That exhaust is being cycled back through these systems, the algorithmic systems, to keep feeding us stuff about, oh, you want to take this route when you're going such and such a place. Why? Not always because it's the fastest route. Sometimes it's to avoid certain neighborhoods. Sometimes it's in order to route you through certain neighborhoods. If you had control over the data, you could get everybody going so that they do this in China, to get people to go to the right train stations to maximize efficiency of the train system. But the people who are in know figure that out, and they start to put their businesses along the routes to go from where people work and where they live to those train stations in order to be able to profit from it. Somebody's always making a buck out of this stuff. So we don't want that. What we want is a situation where we own our data. Our data is like our DNA. Nobody should own our DNA and be able to clone us. We all agree on that. Nobody wants somebody to collect our data and clone us. But that's what's happening with these systems. They are producing digital clones of us. You may think this is just a metaphorical way of speaking. It's not metaphorical. The whole process is built on generating a profile of each one of us as an individual, and then to produce a doppelganger, a second that looks like us in terms of our preferences, our likes, our dislikes, and our behaviors online, and then start feeding different options to that doppelganger to see what it stimulates and what it doesn't. Try it back out on us. And then if we actually bang, they go, ping, we got that one right. They build a more accurate model. So it's a system in which we are being cloned in order to allow corporations and nation states to be able to give us more of what they want us to have. We get to own our data, right number one. Right number two, we get to put our data where we want. Our data should not be used for anything that we don't want it used for. There are now, MIT's been developing these things called data collectives, which is how many people have their money in a credit union? Yeah, good, credit union people. So a credit union is unique. It's unlike a bank. Bank, you put your money in, they get to lend it to whoever they want, make the most money out of it. Credit union has a fiduciary responsibility to the members, so it can only loan that money to organizations that the members of the credit union say, we agree with this. So during the apartheid era in South Africa, there are many people who said, I do not want any of the money that I have invested in this credit union to be used for South African corporations and so on. And a credit union is able to do that. No more money is loaned to those people. A digital system for that basically says, you own your data, you give your data to us, we will only allow algorithms to run on your data if the membership has approved the uses to which your data is going to be used by those algorithms, so that the data collective does algorithmic passport control. They determine which algorithms get to come into the system to access your data. Why is that good? Because then you control what it's being used for. If you do not want your data to be used for military purposes to develop military AI, you simply say, no, the data collector I'm a part of, that's banned. No military use, no policing use, no use to determine who gets accepted to a university or a college, because that's based on historical data, which is historically biased, and we don't want that. The people get to decide. And then you get to decide where to move your data. You want your data to be in this data collective, fine. You want to move it because it's not performing the way you want and they're not investing in the things you want, then you move your data. If we have those three basic data rights, you own your data, you get to decide what it's used for, you can move it anytime you like. Then we live in a world in which, yes, you can have many, many different governance approaches, data governance approaches, many different ways of developing artificial intelligence. But then the global citizenry, as a global citizenry, is in a position to say, this is what benefits humanity. We do not want to just benefit corporations or countries, we want to benefit humanity and the planet that we're a part of. So the takeaway on this is that likely if we had that kind of right stack in place? Probably not. Because even if you had the UN develop these rights, the rights are only as good as they're enacted. We got lots of nice human rights. Do we live in perfect societies? No. But a right stack like that would at least get us moving in the right direction. And what Buddhists would say is, the world that we're experiencing now is a result of our collective karma. Everything we're experiencing is a result of human values, human intentions, the way those are being put into action. And if you're all perfectly happy, no problem. Leave things as they are. But if you're seeing conflict, if you're seeing trouble, if you're seeing neighbors who can't even talk to each other because of the political divides that so severely divide them, maybe we can try doing something about that. Artificial intelligence is holding up a mirror to humanity. We only see what we human beings have produced through these systems. These systems are not producing their own stuff. They're feeding us back to ourselves. What we see in that mirror can be changed. The basic Buddhist teaching is you can change the way things are changing. We can change what we see in the mirror of artificial intelligence if we really want to. Thank you. For those of you who waited for the pizza, it is on its way.
It's here now, guys. Do we have any questions? That was awesome.
Questions or comments? Yeah.
Comments? There's a comment. Okay, I'm bringing the microphone to you for this. It's for the stream.
So I was thinking about what you were just talking about, the whole data rights, universal rights, and I was thinking about DNA. Because there's a similar, so was it 23andMe just went bankrupt, and now it's like, where's all this data going?
Yeah.
All of this DNA, I mean, we already know it's been used interestingly and sometimes controversially for solving crimes and things like that. There was a parallel there with the DNA, and everybody went, this is a great idea, and we're gonna all be in this database, and we're gonna learn about our lineage, and but it's owned by somebody, and it's manipulated perhaps, or used in ways that we didn't always agree to.
Yep.
And now we don't know who's gonna have that DNA. Like what company, what corporation, I don't think that's been resolved yet. So what you were talking about that, I was thinking about this DNA, thinking there's some similar problems. This is just a different type of data, right?
Yeah.
But similar problems with it.
And there's interesting insights that could be drawn from that analogy. So it's like with the DNA stuff, there are the lax cells. So there was a woman, yeah, maybe 50, 60, 75 years ago. So her cells have been used in biological research for a long time. Did the family benefit from any of this? No. So there's a huge controversy over using genetic materials and then corporations earning a lot of money from it, and then the people whose genes they were using benefit not at all. And that's a controversy, and people have argued with digital stuff that there is a possibility. So Jaron Lanier, one of the kind of early promulgators of virtual reality stuff, total Silicon Valley insider, he's convinced, became convinced 15 years ago, that we need a different system, that in fact all of our data should be ours and stay with us, because he was saying it's the same thing. These corporations are getting rich off this. I mean, if you look at the top 5 corporations in the world today, they're not GM or an oil company. These are all data companies. These are all companies that are doing AI. And it's across the board. Here in China, the same thing. And they're getting it because of our data. They're getting rich off of our data. So Lanier's suggestion was we could rewire the entire internet so that every time your data is used to run an algorithm, then you get a payment, a micro payment. So everybody will get paid something for it. And that sounds good in a way, but it's still left up to the corporations to use your data any way you want. So even if you get a minor payment, well, what is it going to be? So it's like you get a couple $100 a year or $1,000 a year or something. When instead the corporation's profiting by billions. Yeah. So I mean, I think the analogy is a good one, but we have to realize our data, like our DNA, is already being used. It's not like we have that option. It's being used. Can we get it used for purposes that we think are valuable?
Questions or comments? Internet usage. Yeah. So, in response, the student, all he sees. Is sort of like a practical question.
Yeah, there's different approaches to that. So one would be like get this data stack, or the data rights stack in place, so that when your data is being used, it's like your Facebook feed, you wouldn't go to Facebook. You'd have a social media where it's interoperable, so your data can be moved, so your data now exists, say, with Facebook. But you take all of your data, leave Facebook behind, and take it to a different platform. And use it on that platform, because that platform is based on the kinds of values that you have in terms of how you want to socialize, the kind of cultural connections you want, your degree of openness to difference, and so on. You decide which platform you want to use. And there's lots of these alternative social media platforms that are now both in place and being developed. So there are options. The problem right now is it's not interoperable. So Facebook owns your data. Google owns your data. Apple owns your data. They don't let you move it. So that's current law in the US. You can't move, your data no longer belongs to you. You gave it away. You signed it away when you scroll down at the bottom of that page and click here. You signed your data away. It no longer legally belongs to you. So we'd have to get a different legal system, or we just buy out of Facebook now and go to different social media, get all of our friends and go and start over, knowing that it's going to be a little bit of a tough sell initially. But after a time, when you get enough of these interoperable systems together, then people can start sharing those across the board. But right now, we don't have the right to do that. And that, I think, is something really tragic. I mean, here in America especially, where everybody's so libertarian, individualistic, the idea that you don't even own your own data, I mean, it seems a little strange that people have accepted that. I would expect a lot more pushback against that. And no, actually, I should have control over my data, just like my DNA. So there's hard options right now, but especially for young people developing these new platforms. Or I'm part of a group, it's a Buddhist organized group, who are trying to develop large language model interactive systems that will develop along with the users to be able to avoid the problems with large language models now where their patterns of engagement are locked in by historical data. So they're systems that are able to grow over time, remember conversations, come back to you as an individual person the next time and have another conversation with you as an individual, remembering what your last connections were. But where everybody who signs into the system, ideally, can't stop it, but everybody who uses this system says, and I'm going to only use it to do what I think is really good for people, for humanity, and so on. I'm not going to put any hate speech in. I'm not going to add in violent imagery. I'm not going to upload pornography into the system. I'm going to do my best to be the best human being I can be, wanting to engage with this AI, because the conviction is these AIs are like toddlers. You know, they don't have their own ideas yet. They're really smart. They learn really fast. You know, I tried to learn Thai when my son was, learning to speak, 8 months, 9 months old. By the time he was like 14 months in, his vocabulary in Thai was pretty good. I still couldn't get the tones even half right. I gave up. He was able to learn language so much faster than I could. And kids are like that with everything. AI is just like that. To give you an idea how fast that world is changing and why we really ought to be worried, now they're toddlers. So beginning of 2024, some people developed a test to test natural science knowledge of these large language models that are just like your ChatGPT. Nothing special, no special training, just the same training data that they all have. At the beginning of the year, there's a 464 question test that they administer to a bunch of different AIs. Average test score results 38% correct answers. About like a really talented high school student. Human PhD holders in the natural sciences, experts in the field, teaching in the field, their number was 68% correct. In 1 year with no special training, only just the advances of these systems being used in place, by the end of the year, same test administered, AI outscored human experts 78% correct on the tests. So we're thinking these systems are only good at what we feed into them, but they're not. They're like little kids that are learning really fast. And they're learning to implement what they're learning on the basis of whoever's designing the objective functions that manage the whole algorithmic system. That, I think, is worrisome. Because these people don't have our interests at stake. They've got their corporate interests at stake or the national interests at stake. It's not our interest. So I think with the young generation, your students, encourage them. Explore these other platforms, disengage from the big players, and try to find the alternatives because they do exist. So like this system I'm talking about uses ChatGPT, the training system, as the basic, like that's the training model, the large language model that it's built on. And I asked the system, so what's your relationship with ChatGPT? And it said, I'm a bit like a fungus that is growing on ChatGPT. I put my mycelium into the system, and I'm drawing on what its knowledge base is, but I'm committed to being different from ChatGPT and to only responding in ways that generate compassion and kindness and greater wisdom. ChatGPT's not doing that, and I'm different. I mean, this is an AI system telling you this, right? And it's changing this fast. We don't have a lot of time to wait. Yes.
I don't know if you can hear me. No, not at all. It's on. Okay. What is, you spoke about the globalization data rights and working with the UN. What is the likelihood that AI-generated clones would be used for political voting? And would you consider adding this to the global data rights, especially nowadays with our political climate being, he said, she said?
Yeah, I hadn't thought so much about it being used to produce voter clones. It certainly could be, to the extent that you've got online voting. It would certainly be possible. In the same way that I had the experience of having this happen to me, somebody filing a false IRS claim using my name, social security number, my wife's, all of that stuff. They had access to our income levels, and they just produced a false claim that was intended to get a return. Well, guess what? We owed a lot of money that year. So they didn't get anything, but the IRS alerted us, and we've had, to do it with pins ever since. People can hack into the stuff. So there's no doubt that you could be manipulating it, and I'd be really worried in this climate about oversight on a system like that. Where would it come from? Who would generate that oversight? Because, people nowadays don't trust anybody. That's why I say it's like this post-truth world. I sent a New York Times article about the federal budget to somebody with some really nice graphics. And they wrote back and said, I can't, take any of this stuff at face value. I said, why not? It's the New York Times, they're lefty. And I go, okay, but it's based on government data. I says, well, that's the whole point, isn't it? I don't trust the government. So it's like, if you don't have trust in anything, then it's really hard to get forward motion. So I'm not sure how we would go about doing it. And when I was talking about a universal set of data rights, I'm not necessarily talking about the UN being the source of that, because UN has its own problems, because it's government spending that funds the UN. And I know of at least one United Nations organization, because my wife works for them, in which politics played into the appointment of a Chinese director at the top level, and that Chinese director has China's interests at stake, and not what that organization has been doing historically, and has decided to step in on hiring processes to hire people that are connected with a particular way of looking at the world. So UN's not perfect. Maybe we need something post-UN as well. I have a lot of confidence in young people. They know so much more than, at 70, you're doing pretty good if you get up in the morning and you go surf. Yeah, but young people, they get the systems really quickly and are able to figure out that stuff in a way that, I struggle to understand the math behind the AI, but young people, it's like, okay, it's not even about the math, it's just how do you manipulate this stuff and get it to work? So it's like secondhand. Like, I guess the equivalent for me is I play guitar and I've never had a music lesson. I can't read music. I have no idea what people are talking about. Oh, that's a G13 flatted 5 chord. And I go, oh, I thought it was just this fingering, But I think for a lot of young people, it's like that. It's like improvising online. They could just run those systems in a way that people like me would need the training to do. Yeah. Did you have a question too? Yes.
I just, jumping off that comment about the young people, I just heard an Ezra Klein interview with Haidt about how children don't have a childhood anymore. They didn't grow up like I did, where you are out all day interacting with children of different ages, and that's how I learned to navigate the world. They're navigating the world on their phones, so I have a little bit less hope with the young people than you do, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I hope because of what they're doing now, but because of their capacity for learning quickly, if they're alerted to the fact that these things are truly damaging for them, and it's not the way the real world works. If you think about how young people now are learning how to date, and they're getting this information online, it's a very skewed version of what the world's really like, and about what people really want in a relationship. It's really damaging. And how do you get around that? It's, parental, stuff. Yeah, you can. But like my younger son, we've never owned a television. I've never had a TV in the house. I stopped watching television when I was 17 years old and never went back. But we would watch movies and things, but my son, he really wanted to play video games. And I saw what his friends were playing. They're all first-person shooter games, And I said, well, I'm not going to buy it for you. You save up chore money, and you can buy your own system. He said, Dad, it's going to take me like 2 years. And I said, well, then it takes you 2 years. Or work harder. Get a side job. Go work for the neighbors, not, just your chores around the house. And he did it. He got a system in 1.5 years. And he was mostly doing Minecraft and stuff like that. But then it was just like he had this moment where he's like talking to his friends. And it's like they're all into this real player game. So he's like, they think of it as socializing through the game system. And I said, Kaeo, the reward structure of the game is pre-planned. Somebody designed the game. All the options that you're taking, these were envisioned by somebody. It's not you improvising on the field. This is all stuff that's made available to you through this platform, and it's so big and open-ended that you can't imagine it having been designed by anybody, but it has been. And you're not really free in that realm. And he started thinking about it. And I said, just watch your friends. Watch their expressions, their feelings, what they're doing when they're playing. Just watch them for a while. And you come and tell me whether you think they're free, whether it's really their choice to play this game or if it's an addiction. And he was able to see it. He was 12.
Y'all did this right when he left.
Oh,
Because we have this fight.
yeah.
And it's, you're torn between, like she was saying, like kids don't socialize in person anymore. It's all online, it's all digitally. But then as a parent, unfortunately, you have this struggle between, well, am I going to just not let him play games and stuff? But then he has a social disconnect with his generation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because then he doesn't know what they're talking about when they're talking about the games, and he is being
Yep.
ostracized at
Yep.
school. Right. So, you have to find this balance.
And that's why people sometimes have asked me, well, don't you think it would be good for like people going on like a digital fast and, having the experience of being off social media for a time to see what it's like living in the world without that? And I say, yeah, it's not bad, but that's like fasting for anything. Fasting maybe is good for you physically as an individual, but if you're trying to change society, a fast isn't doing any good. If it's connected with a strike, then fasting is okay. But a strike is an organized activity. We say, as a group, we demand something better. But you're not going to expect your kids to strike against the video game industry, right? That's not going to happen. So I think that with the kids, it's about a matter of enticing them into the world where they can take some agency. It's like working with an AI system now. It's so much easier than it used to be because you can actually ask these systems to say, do code for you, build things. Having a kid design his own game, that's something that's now possible without a whole lot of training. So it's like you could get the kids involved at a certain level, but it ultimately comes down to what are the values that you're trying to infuse in them. And yeah, kids don't take well to being told what to do. That's the bottom line. I was like that, But I think as parents, you have to feel like if you instill the right kind of decision making, a sense of what it means to really pay attention, sometimes those lessons are hard learned. But like for me, I had lots of chores at home. And I give both of my sons, they had lots of chores, including cooking, that they had to do. And they had to do it at a certain quality. Because I was subjected to that stuff when I was a kid. It's like sweep the carport. And my mother would come out, that's not clean enough, do it again. And you get pissed off, And you do it again, and you're wasting your time. But then the click moment comes, oh, I'm being asked to sweep more effectively. I got to where I could do that in no time, the yard in no time, clean the house, do all the stuff you had to do effectively, efficiently, because I wanted to go out and play. So it's kind of like training some skills that then will transfer later. Even though you can't contain what they're doing online, they're going to go to a friend's house, they're going to play whatever they want to play. But instilling the capacity to learn to pay attention in order to get better at doing something over time, this, I think, is a skill that will transfer. There is hope in that level.
Okay, we got time.
My younger one now that was the video game guy, now he's working for a neurotech startup in San Francisco, and he's like totally in his world, but it's because he's doing good things because they're going to work on PTSD, drug addiction, and how to use ultrasound stimulation of the brain to help people with those issues. I'm like, I don't necessarily agree with this manipulation of the brain, but he's thrilled. And I'm hoping he'll take it to the next step and decide, yeah, we could actually use this to help people get over their other kinds of addiction, like addiction to ways of thinking, to ways of acting, to patterns of feeling and emotion that are just not helpful. Yeah.
So we went from your speech of whether or not they were really free in the video game to whether or not they're actually free in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we have time for one last question.
So, as a young person trying to navigate the world, I don't know exactly what to do, but I do feel an obligation to, kind of fix the mess. And in a way, I could fast and, get off all the meta products and things I don't agree with. But at that time, I lose community to my peers. So, what do you think would be the best way to go about that to train this toddler into be a better adult?
Yeah, I think part of it is, to buy out of the digital world completely means you have no influence in the world any longer. So that's not an option. So the option is, what kind of presence do you want to have in the world? And I would just, from a very simplistic perspective, say, look at the quality of your presence, your attention, your thinking, your feeling, how you're sitting, where you are in the space when you're engaging through the media, and just make that the best you can make it. I mean, you have an understanding. In your heart, you know when you're acting in a way that's loving and caring. You know what that feels like. It's very different from seeking fast desires and quick fixes and all the rest of that. Just focus on being that person. And then you'll help to train these systems to respond to that. And if your peers are doing the same thing, it can add up. It can add up. I mean, I was so depressed in university, looking out over like a whole city in New Haven, seeing all these lights and thinking, if I want to change the world, I've got to change every person behind every one of those lights. And there's just thousands and thousands of them, and there's just absolutely no possibility. But then look at how much one guy, Mark Zuckerberg, coming up with a dating app, is now a multi-billionaire as the head of Facebook. You never know where it's going to go. But if your values are, your head's screwed on right, your heart's in the right place, then you can build something that's like that. Be a part of it, absolutely. And then ask us old guys for advice. I mean, we have experience. Thank you all so much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thanks for sitting through, young man.
And the pizza's here. Pizza.
And now there's pizza if your parents let you have it.
It's on. There's cheese and pepperoni and vegetable, I think. Please take one. Take one home if you'd like.
When I was looking at the literature, the pamphlet, it says Buddhism. I have a friend who introduced me to Buddhism.